Climbing up a tree with wet clothes that were now freezing was by far one of the most difficult experiences Izuku has had to deal with. His teeth were chattering, and Katsuki had to give him a boost up to the first branch. They came back from the Firefly Lake at around 2 in the morning, even though Izuku would be lying if he said he didn't want to stay a little longer. Feel his fingers prune in the cold water a little longer, listen to the sound of splashing and cicadas chirping a little longer. But alas, all experiences must become memories at one point or another. On the ride home, the windows were down in an attempt to dry off their wet clothes, and maybe it was because 2 a.m. was well past when he usually slept, but Izuku rambled on to Katsuki. Waking up the next morning, Izuku could barely remember what he had rambled about. Something about Shoto's flirting veil with someone he had his eye on, and he had a faint memory of giggling a lot. The only clear memory he possessed from the last 20 minutes of last night, when his eyelids began to get droopy and his mouth started to run off on its own, was the fact that during the entire time he was rambling, Katsuki never told him to stop. The weekend passed, and Izuku spent much of that time staying home helping his mother out with some work stuff, since he had the time. Their relationship was a close one for the most part. Izuku's dad had left when he was younger, but at least he left behind for Izuku some distant but fond memories of trips to playground or sneaking away from Mama Inko to get some ice cream and go to the beach. When his dad left, Inko channeled all of her energy into two things, Izuku and work. She was the most present mother, sometimes almost too present, and also the hardest worker that Izuku admired greatly, having opened up her own custom print shop. It was known for having odd hours. The shop opened at 7 a.m. and closed at 3 p.m. It made sense when Izuku was smaller and needed someone home when he got off school to take care of him, but as he got older, the more useless the hours were. He could take care of himself. That didn't mean he didn't appreciate the time they had together, as overbearing as it sometimes was. He was taught to appreciate everything. But Izuku could feel it. Something strange but new is coming into his life, rolling in like a storm with clouds so dark that he couldn't see past the frontier. It was unpredictable, exhilarating, terrifying, but most of all, a force of change, and Izuku wasn't sure how that will play out, neither for himself or his relationships to others, his mother, Kachan, or the like. Monday and Tuesday flew by once again, and there wasn't much word from Katsuki. It was fine, for Izuku never expected them to actually be consistent in whatever growing acquaintanceship they had. Katsuki made it clear that he would prefer if they did only 1 hour for each week and just leave it at that, and Izuku believes that that is for the best. However, it didn't stop the Greenette from looking forward to their 1 hour for the week, especially since Katsuki has been relatively tame since they made the deal to become partners for this. And then he'd pinch himself when he found his mind getting too excited, because Izuku didn't need to do that. They weren't friends. Izuku was digging his spoon into the matcha cheesecake he's been anticipating all day, sitting with his friends for lunch that Tuesday, when one of the pole vaulters came over and placed his hand on their table. The pole vaulter team was small but talented, and they usually took up a whole table to themselves. Izuku looked up to see it was Kirishima Ejiro, and then over to the empty seat beside Katsuki where he had just come from. The blonde was busy eating, and didn't seem to notice his teammate was gone. Kirishima was Izuku's friend too, albeit they weren't necessarily close. The redhead was always very outgoing and friendly towards others, so naturally his social circle was large. In Izuku's particular friend group, all of them knew Kirishima and a couple others of Katsuki's friends pretty well. But if Izuku and Katsuki were in the same vicinity, the two groups would suddenly disperse. "Hey!" Kirishima took a seat on the empty spot next to Shoto. "What's good?" Shoto slapped an arm around the redhead's back and gave him a warm greeting. Just eating lunch. How Just eating lunch. How's vault? Kirishima smiled, but scratched the back of his head. I could do better. Being on a team with Bakudeku Katsuki makes you feel both motivated and discouraged at the same time, he laughed. I'm definitely going to make it past regionals this year, though, I think. Izuku smiled. You will. I've seen your practice runs. Kirishima laughed at this. And here I thought you were only stopping to look at one person. At this, the greenette blushed. Meanwhile, the others carried on the conversation with the incomer for a couple minutes, catching up for a little bit, even though some of them shared classes. Finally, Kirishima asked, Listen, I wanted to ask if y'all are coming to the season kickoff barbecue Thursday night. Ochaka perked up. Oh, I was planning on coming. Mina invited me the other day. It's going to be big, isn't it? Yeah, he replied. It's the season kickoff for all the track and field events, but really everyone's focused on pole vault, long jump, and cross country. Ida responded that he was busy, and Shoto hummed. I've been hearing about this. Where is it at? Tetsu's beach house. You know, the modern-looking one off the corner of Heen Street and Baki, Kirishima revealed. It's not going to be crazy or anything. It's just a kickoff. The highlight of the night is going to be the tradition, he said with a wink. Ah, the season kickoff tradition, Izuku thought to himself. Everyone at school practically knew of it. Izuku himself has never been to the annual kickoff, courtesy of his mother, despite being invited every year. But even then, he knew of the tradition. It's always supposed to be a nice barbecue at one of the track members' homes, with just a little bit of drinking and other shenanigans, but nothing too hearty. However, about 10 years ago, some of the members of the cross-country team and another from the hurdles team got into a physical fight over something so small and insignificant, and some others joined in. For some reason, since then, it's been a tradition at the kickoff to have a fight night, where some of the athletes would voluntarily tussle each other and fight for a bit to get the season started, with absolutely no bad blood. Izuku knew Katsuki participated every year. He also knew that the blonde won every year, against whoever it was he was matched up against. It looked fun, especially since there's no actual conflicts that leads to the fighting. It was just an odd tradition. Sure, he wanted to go, but whether or not he would be able to is a different question. Mom, can I go to the season kickoff this Thursday? It's a cookout, Izuku nervously asked Inko later that night when they were eating dinner. He had begrudgingly skipped watching Katsuki's practice in order to go home early to make his mother happy. She knew that Izuku had been stopping by for a few minutes to watch Katsuki's practice for years now, but always preferred him to go home as soon as he was done with his school business. So, in an attempt to maybe put Inko in a good mood, Izuku headed home earlier today and did practically everything she asked as soon as she asked it. Put the laundry in the dryer? Done. Get the rice ready? Done. Set up the table? Done. And now he sits, awaiting the answer to his request. The last time he was able to go to a big function was probably around last month, and even then he had a curfew of 9 p.m. It was irritating, because he was known as that friend who always left when things got started. In middle school or so, it was understandable because most kids were under those rules also, but now he was well above the age to take care of himself. Asking for permission to do things always felt like he was walking on eggshells, or like he was trying to defuse a bomb and had to carefully choose the correct colored wire or else the house would blow up. The funny thing was, when Inko got mad, she didn't yell, she didn't get angry. Instead, she'd kindly be in opposition and make him feel guilty for instigating arguments. He's taken enough psychology courses to know by this point that his mother's tactics were a tad bit manipulative, but he was sure that wasn't her intention. Inko took a few more bites of her food, taking her time intentionally, which drove Izuku crazy. She always did this when he asked to go out. She'd get really quiet, continue what she was doing, and make him wait in agony before giving him a half-baked response. The sound of the spoon scraping against the plate was excruciating to his ears. Izuku, honey, why are you only asking 2 days ahead? Inko looked up from her plate and asked with a soft voice. Izuku bit his lip. I feel like that's a reasonable time to ask. Besides, I only got invited today. Who invited you? Kirishima, Izuku responded. The pole vault boy? He's one of Katsuki's friends, right? She asked. Izuku nodded. Yes. It should have been his responsibility to ask you sooner, Izuku, Inko insisted. Izuku felt his hands tense up, but he relaxed himself. Mom, most people don't ask at all, much less 2 days in advance. So why can't you be a little more lenient? I don't care about most people, Zuku. You're my son, and I'm allowed to have standards for what I think is acceptable behavior towards you. You're so precious to me, and I can't stand to have people not be responsible with your time, and why can't I have my own standards? Izuku looked down at his plate and quietly asked. Raising his voice would only make his mother play the victim. Because, Inko took her hand into his own. You can't just think about yourself, Izuku. You also have to think about people's feelings and your family and the impact of the choices you make. Suddenly, Izuku didn't think this was about the kickoff anymore. Mom, is this about whatever you're about to say, Izuku? Her voice was sweet as nectar. Please don't. We never argue. I don't really want this nice day to be ruined. Izuku goes silent at this, and for a moment the air is heavy until he tries one more time. Mom, can I go? At this, Inko sighs and asks, Where is it? After hashing out every single detail down to the T, including the address, his exact curfew, and more, Izuku was finally allowed to go as long as he was home by 10 p.m. If it started at 6 p.m., then that was a good amount of time, Izuku thought to himself, and although he should be more satisfied, more than anything else, he felt frustrated that he had to go through the same conversation and the same process every time he wanted to go somewhere. Inko wanted him to go to a college nearby, an hour at most, so that he can commute back and forth from home, and so he wasn't sure when he was allowed to have more leverage in his life. With an exhausted soul, after dinner, Izuku walked upstairs to his bedroom, locked the door, and laid back on his bed. He stared at the ceiling and took deep breaths. Don't get mad, don't be frustrated, don't get sad. He regulated himself until he was able to stop thinking about how upset he was, and wonders what it would be like to have more control. Katsuki suddenly popped up in his head, and Izuku fought himself thinking about the athlete. When he was with Katsuki the other night, it seemed so easy to have a sense of control. Izuku didn't know what it was, but with Katsuki's confidence and pestering, it was the push he needed to do something out of his comfort zone. Izuku pulls up the picture Katsuki had taken on his phone from the night at the lake. He looked at his own smile, big and carefree, as he treaded water in the darkness under the beautiful night sky. Without thinking, he pressed the call button. When he realized what he'd done, Izuku bolted straight up on his bed and freaked out at his phone, dropping it in the process. He fumbled onto the ground, reaching for it and desperately needing to end the call. But right as he picked it up, Katsuki picked up. Deku? Katsuki asked with annoyance evident in his tone. They hadn't talked since the night at the lake. Izuku clutched his phone tightly, bringing it to his ear. Kachan! His voice was a little too loud in the speaker. Shit, lower your voice. You're gonna fucking blow up my ears, the blonde said through the phone. Katsuki's voice on the line was husky, and Izuku shook his head. Sorry. Sorry for what? Blowing up my ears, or for missing my practice today? Katsuki teased. What, am I not interesting enough anymore? That's not true, Izuku said a little too quickly before realizing how creepy he sounded. I had something to do at home. But you noticed? Izuku found himself slightly smiling at that. It was funny. After a beat of silence, Katsuki asked, So what the fuck did you want? Oh, right. Izuku forgot that in a trance, he had called the blonde by accident. He wasn't sure if he just wanted to feel the same sense of freedom that being around Katsuki gave him, even if it was for the few hours they were together, or if his finger really did move by itself. And now he had already taken up 30 seconds of Katsuki's time and was going to get a fat yelling if he didn't say something worth those seconds. Izuku thought quickly. I need help with the physics homework. After a couple of moments of silence, Izuku thought the line had been cut, but then Katsuki spoke up again. "You're a shitty liar, Deku," the blonde stated as a fact. Izuku paled. What do you mean?" "You have the highest average in physics, is what I mean," Katsuki spoke gruffly. "The fuck you need my help for? You're trying to make fun of me or something?" "No!" Izuku found himself exclaiming in a panicked tone. "It's just that you have the second highest, and I missed the lesson today because I was at a dress rehearsal for the student council initiation." That part wasn't a lie. Katsuki considered the situation. "Not my problem." "Kachan, please," Izuku pleaded, suddenly realizing now that he needed to be caught up. "Mr. Aizawa will catch you up, nerd," Katsuki put out. That was true, however, Izuku argued. "But the homework is due tomorrow." After a bit of shuffling on the other end, Katsuki then spoke directly into the phone, voice deep as usual. "You really want it that bad, huh? What are you gonna do for me, Deku?" At this, Izuku's face heated up, and his brain desperately tried to crawl out of the gutter. It was just that those words were often heard in other circumstances, that Izuku's mind went straight there. Swallowing, he responded shyly, "What do you want?" There was a pause on the line, as if Katsuki was thinking. Izuku sits there waiting patiently on the other line, as he wonders what bargain the blonde will strike. Katsuki would never really ask anything of him, even if he couldn't do it himself, so Izuku wasn't sure what was going to be the other end of the deal. "Sneak out," Katsuki finally interrupted the silence. "Right now. By yourself." Izuku looked appalled at the phone. Right now? Kachan, it's not even dark out yet." "I have eyes too, Deku," Katsuki stated boredly. Izuku clutches his hair. "I'm gonna get caught. I can't." "But you want to," Katsuki stated as a matter of fact. Izuku clutches his hair. "I'm going to get caught. I can't." "But you want to," Katsuki stated as a matter of fact. Izuku paused. "What do you mean?" "Admit it, Deku. You want me to give you an excuse to break the rules. Isn't that why you called me?" Katsuki said, and Izuku could practically see him smirking from the other side of the phone. Izuku could barely say anything. What was he doing? Was that why he had clicked the button in the first place? Why Katsuki was the person he thought of after the debacle with his mother? If it was, he refused to admit it, and said one more time, "Kachan, I called you to get help on my physics homework." Katsuki hummed, and then stated his ultimatum. "Then sneak out." Izuku sputtered and looked out his window. His mother right now was in her room, going through her work mail. He could hear her concentration music playing downstairs from here. And then he spoke into the speaker. "Where do I even go?" "You know the playground near the yellow gas station?" Izuku's hands froze. The playground near the yellow gas station? Was Katsuki kidding? Did he know it? How could he not? It was almost more surprising that Katsuki had asked him the question in the first place. It was where they met all those years ago. With a quiet tone, the brunette responded, "Of course I do. I guess you've forgotten." "Meet me there, in 10. Bring your shit. I'll begrudgingly help you, but you owe me," Katsuki demanded. Izuku huffed out a fine. Then he made sure his bedroom door was locked before opening his laptop. In a moment of pure genius, Izuku clicked on a video titled Snoring Sounds that played for 4 hours and set it on his bed at a normal volume. Then, as quietly as he could, he lifted his window with his homework clutched in his armpit and prayed that he wouldn't get caught. Izuku ran to the playground in record time, trying to gain as much distance as he could from his house to feel safer from his mother's all-seeing eyes. Once he could see the playground and vicinity, Izuku's memories flashed back to summer afternoons spent with a certain blonde on the swing talking about their favorite superheroes and athletes, or Katsuki spinning him on the merry-go-round while he screamed in excitement. To see them both now about a decade and more older as two separate people made him feel a bit sad inside. Izuku saw the other boy on one of the swings, hands holding his homework and looking down at the paper in concentration. Seeing Katsuki's tall and muscular body in the tiny kid swing made him laugh out loud, and at the sound the blonde looked up and then rolled his eyes. Bastard. Katsuki clicked his tongue. You actually did it. I did. Izuku smiled before plopping in a swing next to Katsuki. Aren't you proud of me? For betraying your poor mother? Katsuki smirked. What a terrible son. Izuku looked appalled. You're the one who told me to. Katsuki waved him off. Did I? Can't recall. Izuku stuck out his tongue and swung his feet back and forth for a moment or two. Do you come here often? Katsuki looked back at his homework, which was halfway done. None of your damn business. How much of a wave oscillation do you get down? Izuku thought about it. Not much. I was only there for the first 10 minutes of the lesson. Turns out, Katsuki was an impatient teacher. Who would have guessed? Izuku was absolutely brilliant at motion physics and not so great at sound physics. It made sense, considering his love for analyzing movement in athletes like Katsuki. Every time he took a second too long to understand a concept, the blonde would whack him on the top of his head with his own homework. It never hurt, but it was a bit annoying. It proved to be very effective, though, because Izuku was determined to get it right quickly. After about 40 minutes or so, Izuku had understood the lesson enough to have completed the homework, but instead of going home, he sat there for a little longer. His mother hadn't blown up his phone with a billion text messages yet, so he assumed his scheme had worked. And being a little proud of himself, Izuku told Katsuki about it. So the poor woman thinks you're having snoring problems now. Katsuki snorted at this. Izuku shrugged as his feet swung back and forth. Better than her thinking I'm going out and doing crack. But you're really just going out to get help on your homework, Katsuki pointed out. What a nerd. Hey, Izuku frowned. You're the one who is helping me, so who's the nerd now? Still you, Katsuki insisted. I'm fucking built like a god, so any nerdiness I have cancels out, the blonde says before slapping his own thick biceps. Izuku couldn't disagree with the first part. That's not how it works, Izuku rolls his eyes. And I'm strong too, you know. Katsuki raised a brow at that. Oh yeah? As a matter of fact, yes, Izuku huffed and stood up to his full height, putting his hands on his hips and puffing out his chest. Grinning mischievously, Katsuki hopped off his swing and stood up to his full height and took a step closer until he was towering above Izuku and looking down at the green-eyed boy. Izuku felt heat travel up his neck. Katsuki was so tall and big. How about you come to the kickoff Thursday night, and we can see just how strong you are. You can probably take on Tokiyami or something, Katsuki spoke. I can probably take on you, Izuku in a moment of confidence responded, looking up at the taller. Oh? Katsuki took a step forward until Izuku's back was against the post of the swing set and leaned down to the brunette's height. You think so? Izuku felt like he couldn't breathe and he didn't know why. You never know. Stepping back and sitting back down in his swing, Katsuki let out a gruff laugh. Is that so? Izuku sits back down on his swing next to him and holds onto the chains, rocking back and forth. It was funny that he didn't really feel awkward. He was more surprised that he wasn't kicked out of Katsuki's sight the moment they were done. The sun was slowly setting, as if it was giving Izuku enough time to get a bit more conversation in with the person he considers his longtime adversary, as if wanting him to get closer and touch the fire. The playground looked exactly like how it did when they were little, except that Katsuki was no longer a lanky child, but a handsome all-star athlete with a personality problem, and Izuku was not the same person either. Izuku breathed in the evening spring air as he listened to Katsuki complain about one member on his pole vault team when Izuku had asked him how practice went, and wondered at what point along the road did this stop being their normal, and then, as they lightly argued about whether baths or showers were better for the next 10 minutes, Izuku then wondered if at any point this once again could become their new normal. And then he remembered, all experiences have to eventually become memories, because this was a one-semester deal. When the street lamps on Issei turned on, it was Izuku's cue to go, even though he could stay for longer if he wasn't too paranoid. Hopping off his swing, Izuku stretched and turned to Katsuki, who was still standing there. Are you going to be out here for much longer? Izuku asked. Katsuki took out his phone and looked at the time. No. Oh. Izuku stood there awkwardly before pointing in the direction of his home. I'm gonna go before it gets too dark. You don't need to announce it, Katsuki said, shoving his phone back into his pocket of his sweatpants. Right. Izuku laughed shyly, then turned to walk out of the playground. Now that it was dark, he could feel less nervous about climbing back up into his window. He probably would need to jump to reach that first branch, and hope it doesn't make too much of a ruckus. Right as he was about to take another step, he heard Katsuki call out behind him. Oi, clumsy bastard, watch your damn step right there, Katsuki warned, nodding down to his feet. Izuku looked at the blonde and then down at his feet. Right in front of his left foot was a jagged rock that looked hidden by the playground's grass. I said, watch your damn step. You always trip right there, Katsuki pointed out with a blank face. Izuku cocked his head. He always tripped right there? And then Izuku remembered all the bruises and small cuts on his knees when he was younger from falling again and again on this particular rock on his way home. The tears running down his cheeks as smaller Katsuki had to run and get his mom for him. The scold he got for never remembering the rock was there. Izuku looked back up at the blonde, who was sitting on the swing, then smiled. So you do remember, Izuku grinned. As if he was caught doing something he wasn't supposed to do, Katsuki's eyes widened for a split second before he looked away and back down at his phone. But it was just long enough for Izuku to catch it. When Thursday came, Izuku stood in front of his mirror looking at himself. He wasn't wearing anything too crazy, but it wasn't his ordinary outfits either. For a top, he was wearing a nice white sweater and with dark blue spandex leggings underneath. Since he worked out, his legs and ass looked great in leggings, and he was satisfied with himself, even though the pants were a bit tight. He had to come over to Ochako's house so that he, Shoto, and her could ride together in Ochako's car to the beach house. Before he left his house, his mother made sure to emphasize going home on time. The beach house was built in a very contemporary manner in terms of architecture. It was very different from what the majority of Issei looked like, which resembled more of a beach and lake town from the 80s with its classic aura and retro feel. Most of Issei had a colorful, traditional feel to it, but this particular house seemed to be made of all glass, marble, and grayish-white stone. Since Tetsu's family specialized in steel business, they made an exuberant amount of money. It looked like the typical high school backyard cookouts that Izuku's seen in movies. There were tiki torches in the open backyard where the cookout was being held, and the house had mostly glass panels that could slide open and close to let people in and out. There was an infinity-edge pool attached to the side deck with an artificial waterfall design at the front of the pool, where there were plenty of people hanging out around or swimming. There were cars all lined up in the driveway and down the street, and the noise could be heard down the block as they walked up. It was in the huge backyard where all the action went down. The lawn was perfectly manicured, and it was lit up quite nicely. There were tables of foods and drinks. The back patio leading out into the backyard had a huge banner saying, "Season Kickoff," and there were people in every corner. Some downing seltzers, which wouldn't get them drunk considering there was only 5% alcohol content. Others just talking, some tossing a ball around. Since the land was a private property next to the beach, there was no fence separating their backyard from the sand in the ocean, and so the view was gorgeous. Issei's beaches were always beautifully clean with white sand and the backdrop of mountains in the distance. And during this time in particular, the colors of the sun on the water made it look like liquid gold. Izuku spotted Katsuki standing in a group over where some of the athletes were. The blonde was wearing a tight gray tank top and a pair of ripped jeans, which he shouldn't look as good as he does in it. But everyone at the cookout would say the same, so Izuku doesn't feel weird for thinking that. Izuku would officially say that he's probably interacted more with Katsuki in the past week than he probably did in the last month. The other day was at the playground, and then on Thursday, Izuku once again stayed to watch the athletes' solo practice session with a cherry Gatorade in hand. They once again didn't say much to each other, but Izuku appreciated the fact that he was allowed to stay and watch nevertheless, even if he had to leave a bit early again. And then, later Thursday, which was today, the night kickoff, he sees the blonde once more, even though Izuku was sure they won't interact. There was quite literally everyone else to talk to rather than each other. Izuku let himself get dragged along by his friends to talk to one friend group or another, and Izuku, being considered somewhat as a town sweetheart, appreciated the social interaction and was welcomed by everyone. The night crept up on them, but everyone was having a fun time. The music was loud, and the nostalgic synthwave theme to it, remixed with some classical tracks. The ocean was beautiful, as was the house and the vibes. At around 7, the fight matches begun. In the middle of the backyard, there was a large brown tarp that served as the ring, and half of the spectators had lawn chairs stationed around the tarp, and the other half either sat on the ground near the chairs or just stood up to watch. It was well lit, with plenty of tiki torches, outdoor lights, and the lights from inside the house. Some people didn't really care to watch and instead hung out in the corners of the property doing whatever they wanted. But for Izuku in particular, never having witnessed the kickoff party tradition himself, wanted to spectate. He sat on the lawn chair right next to the tarp with a light strawberry beer in his hand. Izuku didn't think beers affected him much, so it didn't hurt to have one. Ochako was to his side, excited to watch, and Shoto was off somewhere doing who knows what. There was a good crowd around the tarp watching a match between two long jump athletes. From across the mat, opposite from him, was where Katsuki sat. The blonde was near his friends. He was sitting on top of a cooler, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, watching the matches. On his arm was an unfamiliar girl that Izuku had never seen before, with long black hair and a pair of gorgeous foxy eyes. Her hand was on his bicep, and Izuku wondered what she was feeling right now. Was his arm as thick and as sturdy as it looked? He wanted to know for physics purposes, of course. It didn't matter to him what or who Katsuki did. That wasn't his business, but it didn't mean he didn't get shy thinking about it. When Katsuki caught him staring and their eyes made contact, dark red, ruby eyes and wide green eyes, Izuku looked away quickly and back at the match. It had been an easy win. The victor helped the loser up off the ground, and they high-fived as if they weren't just beating the shit out of each other moments before. It was honestly a stupid tradition, considering that if any of these athletes get seriously injured, then that ruined the purpose of a good luck kickoff party. That didn't mean it wasn't entertaining as shit. As the matches went on, Izuku found himself analyzing the forms and techniques of the participants to Ochako, who was sure was only paying half attention. It didn't matter though, since he gets excited about these kinds of things and needs someone to rant about, even if they weren't paying attention. Izuku was probably annoying some people near him with his constant chattering about this person's form or that person's technique or what they did great or what they could do better, but he couldn't shut his mouth. Ochako nodded along, but he was sure she was too busy staring at the biceps of one of the cross-country athletes who was up against a pole vaulter at the moment. When the match concluded, Izuku was suddenly interrupted in his ramblings by a guy with yellow hair and a scowl that he has never met before. The boy's face looked annoyed as he snapped his fingers at Izuku. "Yo, Greenie!" The stranger got his attention, and Izuku turned to him, frowning. "If you think you know so much, how about you get in the ring, huh?" At this, Izuku waved his hands in front of him. "Oh, no, it's not what it looks like. I'm sorry, it's just a bad habit I have. I just like to analyze people's performances. I don't mean anything by it. Before Izuku could finish his statement, the yellow-haired stranger stood up and clapped his hands loudly, walking to the center of the ring. "Hey, everyone!" Izuku hailed. "This guy right here," he pointed straight at Izuku, "desperately wants a match." At the same time, Izuku waves his arms and shouts in protest. The crowd around them yells in delight and encouragement. Some people were patting him on the back, edging him on. Suddenly, Izuku could feel Katsuki's eyes on him. The instigator continued. "And he thinks he's the shit." Izuku yelled out, "I never said that!" But the crowd was hollering again, loving the confidence. "So how about," the stranger announced loudly, "we let him go up against the best of the best," and then pointed to Bakugo fucking Katsuki. He ended with a loud thunder, and the crowd went quiet. Izuku thought back to their conversation at the playground when he mentioned that he could probably take on Katsuki. Oh fuck. He had manifested this, didn't he? He jinxed himself, didn't he? Fuck. From beside him, Ochako was panicking. No one in the crowd was cheering anymore, knowing Katsuki and Izuku's connection with each other. Monoma? Kirishima nervously chuckled from the other side of the tarp near where Katsuki was. I don't think that's a great idea. Izuku looked over to Katsuki, who was still leaned forward on his elbows, except this time he was looking straight at Izuku, with a raised eyebrow. It was as if the blonde was telling him, "Are you going to take the challenge or not?" It was almost playful and yet competitive at the same time. Izuku suddenly didn't feel that scared anymore. The Katsuki that he's interacted with recently was rude, annoying, and had some issues, but Katsuki was no villain. Izuku would be okay. Right, Ochako panically commented from his side. Not the best idea. Why not? The stranger, apparently named Monoma, asked again. The crowd looked uneasy, but Izuku wasn't having it. Yeah, why not? Izuku leaned forward in his seat and looked to Ochako and then Kirishima. Izuku! Ochako's eyes widened. He's Bakugo! She said his name with emphasis. And you're Izuku. Katsuki stood up, shaking the girl off him. The fuck kind of friend are you if you don't think he stands a chance? He can speak for his damn self. That's not what I meant. Ochako rolled her eyes. Izuku was internally surprised. It almost sounded like Katsuki was advocating for him. Or maybe the blonde just wanted to get the show on the road so that he could beat him up. Either way, he found himself agreeing with Katsuki on this odd situation. I know what you meant, Ochako. Izuku smiled at her. But I'll be fine. Kachan plays hard, but he plays fair. And then Izuku turned to look at the blonde. You won't go easy on me, will you, Kachan? Katsuki smirked and stretched his arms and legs. Not even if you beg for it, Deku. The way Katsuki said his nickname sent shivers down his spine, but Izuku was suddenly very excited, and that energy transferred over to the crowd, which was now alive again and chanting for them to fight. Izuku predicted that he would lose, but that didn't mean he was weak, because he wasn't. It just meant that Kachan was over 6 feet tall, an incredible athlete, pure muscle and bulk, and Izuku had a physiological disadvantage. He could win, although those chances were slim. However, if he was going to go out, he was going to go out strong. When the whistle blew, Izuku knew that if he didn't take the initiative, he would lose the opening that's presented at the beginning of each match. He has noticed it in almost every match of the night so far, that when the whistle blew, the opponents would kind of snake around each other, testing out the waters for a minute or so before going in. To pad for his lack of height and weight, Izuku needed to use that as his opening. Therefore, the moment the whistle blew, Izuku ran in, catching the blonde off guard, and instead of going for a high hit, the greenette slid to the ground and used his momentum to hook himself around Katsuki's leg and make the athlete fall to the ground in a thud. The crowd roars in delight, but Izuku knew that it would be over in about 5 seconds before he was in dangerous waters. And so, as soon as he got Katsuki on the tarp, he climbed on the blonde's back and used his body weight to hold the boy's arms down to his side. The struggle lasted a whole 8 seconds before Katsuki threw him off and onto his back. Before he could be pushed back down into the tarp, Izuku rolled over and pushed himself up onto his feet. Katsuki, if anything, was a fast learner. He didn't let an opening happen, but instead lunged forward towards Izuku with his left side going in first. Noticing that immediately, Izuku dodged to the right. At the last moment, Katsuki switched his trajectory by pivoting his feet to the right, and slammed his left leg and a roundhouse kick straight to Izuku's back. Fuck. More than in pain, Izuku was further impressed at how quickly Katsuki could sense Izuku's directional changes and adapt just as quickly. Feeling the full force of the kick, Izuku fell to the tarp on both elbows, and the pressure hurt his joints. But Izuku thought fast. Just as Katsuki's left leg was coming down from the roundhouse kick, Izuku pushed himself off and towards the single leg that was rooted to the ground and pulled up, making the blonde lose his balance and fall. Izuku made quick work to climb on top of the athlete while he was experiencing the shock of hitting the tarp, and kneeled on the blonde's ribs, pushing in, while his right arm pulls back to land a punch square on the side of Katsuki's jaw. The crowd screamed. Some whistled at the way Izuku was practically straddling him. This was not what they had been expecting from Midoriya Izuku of all people. There was an actual struggle instead of a straight knockdown. Just as Izuku was about to land another one, Katsuki did a crunch and got a hold of Izuku's waist, suddenly lifting up the smaller off his ribs and stood up in a feat of raw strength, and then threw the grenade over his shoulder. Izuku landed roughly on his left shoulder and head. There was what looked to be a jagged rock underneath the part of the tarp that his head landed on, and upon landing it cut through the tarp and slashed part of Izuku's forehead. Some trickles of blood ran down the side of his forehead, down his face, and he looked both badass and terrifying. It still didn't yield. In fact, neither of them yielded for a while. Katsuki was getting in his hits, slams, jabs, but Izuku wasn't faring too badly himself. In fact, he managed to get more in on Katsuki than anyone else had in years that the blonde had been participating in the tradition, despite his size. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, and he could barely feel the cuts and bruises that had been accumulating. The fight was getting a bit long, but the crowd was still excited as ever. Then, at the same time, Izuku was diving down for a lower body move. Katsuki read him and dove even lower, until they clashed, and Katsuki grabbed Izuku by the waist. Fuck. In a second, Izuku was hoisted up into the air, and before he knew it, he was slammed with all of Katsuki's momentum and on his left side into the ground, and Izuku immediately felt a searing pain in his shoulder and sides. He wasn't sure if it was something dislocated, but he wouldn't be too surprised. Opening his mouth in a small cry, Izuku clenched his eyes shut at the pain, before he felt Katsuki's body loom over him, one hand on his neck, his knees pinning him down. And it was then that Izuku let out a pain yield, and the crowd erupted in screams, and once more, Katsuki was the victor. But even with that fact, Izuku was being cheered on too. Both of their names were being shouted, and Izuku used his right side to push himself up into a sitting position, and he flinched at the pain in his left side. It hurt like hell. The crowd around them was loud, and already seeking a new match pair, but Katsuki then crouched down next to him, and shouted over the hecticness. The athlete flicked him on the side of the face to get his attention. "Oi," he said, "stand up. Get off the fucking tarp." Izuku looked at the blonde and then nodded, using his right side to push himself up, before sitting back down in pain as his left shoulder and sides felt a piercing sharp discomfort, and he clenched his eyes shut for a second before opening them with a panted breath. Katsuki, witnessing this, took a look at his shoulder, which burned in agony at the touch. "Shit," Katsuki said under his breath, and then looked around hurriedly. Ochako was quickly walking towards them, yelling over the noise if he was okay, and Izuku nodded with a smile even though his left was hurting like hell. Before she could get a word in, Izuku felt a hand on his right side where it didn't hurt. Suddenly, Katsuki had Izuku's uninjured arm around the blonde shoulder, and helped him up so that he could put more pressure on his right side and less on his left. Suddenly, Katsuki had put Izuku's injured arm around the blonde's shoulder and helped him up so that he could put more pressure on his right side and less on his left. Ochako, worried, opened his mouth to ask him if he was all right, but Katsuki barked at her, "Fucking get out of my way, round face," and in shock she just froze and let him pass, crutching Izuku on his side. "Kachan, I'm fine," Izuku insisted. "You fucking idiot," Katsuki scolded as they entered back into the house. "Your shoulder is a hair close to being dislocated. You should have yielded minutes earlier, you dumb fuck." He sounded annoyed. "But then you would have won," Izuku reasoned. "I won either way, or did you get a But then you would have won," Izuku reasoned. "I won either way, or did you get a concussion too?" Katsuki responded before calling out to someone. "Oi, Tetsu, where the fuck is your first aid?" Tetsu, the owner of the house, was off on the side with a red solo cup in his hand and quickly pointed down the hall. "Down the hall, and to the left. It's in the laundry room and the left side cabinets. Is he okay?" "The shitty nerd's got a bleeding forehead, nearly dislocated shoulder, and a bruised side," Katsuki grumbled, before dragging them both down the hallway. Upon entering the laundry room, Katsuki turned the bright fluorescent lights on and hauled Izuku over to the washing machine. Letting go, Katsuki reached down and picked him up by the thighs. Izuku, both shocked and shy at the contact, quickly placed his hand on Katsuki's shoulders. As those large round hands held onto his thighs, the way he was picked up was so effortless before Katsuki set him down roughly on top of the washing machine. Izuku winced in pain, but watched as Katsuki went into the cabinet and pulled out a first aid kit, hydrogen peroxide, and some ointment, all while grumbling under his breath. "Kachan, I can do it myself," Izuku tried to convincingly say. It was odd to see Katsuki, who seemed like he wouldn't give a shit about what happened to anyone, be so focused on something like this. Izuku hypothetically could do it himself. He knew exactly what to do to treat something like this. The only problem was that it would be extremely difficult with one arm. Katsuki rolled his eyes. "Just shut the fuck up and sit still." He decides to sit there as Katsuki feels around his shoulder. He winced and bit his lip to ward off the pain. From the looks of it, it seemed like during the last slam, his already battered arm had enough, and now his shoulder wasn't exactly in the wrong frame, but it wasn't exactly in the socket correctly either. After feeling around for a little bit, Katsuki took his upper arm in one hand and the junction between his shoulders, his neck, in the other. "This shit is about to hurt," Katsuki told him before shoving a hand towel nearby in the greenette's mouth. Izuku bit down, and then in one quick movement, Katsuki pushed the two together and popped his shoulder correctly into place again. Izuku screamed into the towel, and his eyesight felt blinded by the pain for a second. But after a minute or two, he felt much relief already, and let the towel drop from his mouth. "That hurt," he affirmed. "Told you, brat," Katsuki replied. "I popped it back into place. But for the next couple of days, try not to strain your shoulders or arms. Lift up your shirt." "What?" Izuku blinked at the athlete. Katsuki rolled his eyes. "Lift up your damn shirt, Deku. I'm going to apply ointment to your bruises to help with the pain." "Oh," Izuku nodded before lifting his shirt slightly to reveal the huge bruise on his left sides. He watched as the blonde applies the numbing ointment with thick calloused fingers. Izuku bit his lip to suppress a shiver at the surprisingly gentle touch from such large hands that slid over his soft skin. It was quieter in here than the rest of the house, but they could still hear the music and chattering of people outside. Izuku wasn't sure in what world he could imagine Katsuki treating his wounds so voluntarily, but to be fair, he did cause them, but since it was a mutual agreement, it was okay. And then Izuku asked with a smile, "How are you so good at this?" Katsuki hummed. "At being incredible in anything athletic, or at treating your shitty wounds?" "Both, I guess," Izuku laughed, "but more on the latter." Katsuki was focused for a second, not answering, before speaking up. "When I first started pole vault, I didn't know proper landing techniques. I used to get tons of shitty bruises, even dislocated my shoulder once or twice. The old hag gave me this shit and told me to fix it myself." Izuku smiled a bit at the ground. "Aunt Mitsuki has always been a do-it-yourself kind of person, hasn't she?" "Sure is," Katsuki affirmed. "Where do you think I get it from?" he sneered. Izuku giggled, then mentioned to Katsuki, "Also, I told you I could take you on." Katsuki flicked him on the nose. "Annoying brat." Izuku groaned playfully. "Kachan, just admit that I was cool." "Stay still," Katsuki hissed as he took a hold of Izuku's chin and used his other hand to rub the peroxide-soaked gauze over Izuku's face to clean off the blood and the cut. After a few moments, Katsuki finally grumbled, "You were a little less lame tonight." "Woohoo!" Izuku dramatically pumped his fist. "A little less lame! That's a new accomplishment for me." "Fuck, I said stay still." Katsuki grabbed his chin tighter. Izuku stilled himself and ignored the sting of the hydrogen peroxide on his cut. Katsuki was very focused, and Izuku couldn't help but look through his eyelashes at the athlete, who was, as of now, very, very close to him. Izuku could smell the expensive cologne off of the other and the sweat. From this distance, Izuku notices that Katsuki's eyes had specks of black in them, like coal in a fire. Katsuki's eye shape always made it look like he was angry, but when he was focused like this, they seemed to get a little bit less down-tilted. He then got caught staring as Katsuki switched his gaze down to stare at Izuku right in his wide green eyes, and Izuku parted his lips to say something, but wasn't sure what to say. "Sorry I was staring, I just noticed you got black specks in your eyes." "What did I tell you?" Katsuki broke the silence. "Stop looking at me with those creepy-ass eyes," and then went back to cleaning his cut. "I wasn't," Izuku lied. I told you before, Deku. You're a shitty liar, Katsuki said in a low voice. Izuku gulped. Before he could say anything else in response, the sound of laughter and the TV playing got louder from the outside. Both Izuku and Katsuki turned their heads towards the sound. Are they watching the blue ember outside? Izuku tries to pinpoint. He thought he recognized the quote. Katsuki listened for a second before nodding. They are. More importantly, they have shitty taste in movies. Izuku hates to admit he was right. That's mean, Kachan. Maybe, but don't tell me you fucking disagree. That movie was ass. Katsuki put on some typical antibacterial cream to his cut. Ugh, it was, Izuku exclaimed. How in the world do they have the best actor in the country in that film and give her 10 seconds of screen time? Because they're idiots, that's how, Katsuki complained as well. The shittiest part was that one of the stupid who was it? Katsuki pauses and thinks. Izuku perked up and laughed. I know what you're talking about. Dr. Kuhn. What kind of villain reveals their entire plot in front of everyone? I thought that trope was over years ago now. It's not even just that. Katsuki found himself chuckling to himself. At the end, he had that rush sob story to try and make the audience tear up, but that shit was so fucking cringy. You're telling me that being told you sucked at piano once by your mom is enough to make you become a mass murderer? Shit was ridiculous. Izuku found himself nodding and laughing in agreement. Even after Katsuki finished putting on a band-aid for his forehead cut, which was thankfully hidden enough by his hair that his mother wouldn't freak out, Izuku had roped in enough into the conversation that Katsuki didn't move from his spot for a good 30 minutes. The conversation was so casual that Izuku forgot the type of relationship they had with each other. Katsuki, much to Izuku's surprise, had a lot of insight on movies, and Izuku could have taken it as an opportunity to call the athlete out on being as much of a nerd as he was, but decided that he didn't want to ruin the moment. The party was still going on strong outside. The fights were still commencing, the crowds were still getting loud, and the music was still playing on the surround sound speakers. But the two of them were oddly enough in the laundry room, talking about movies. Izuku wasn't surprised to find out that Katsuki didn't like romances, but instead loved horror. Thriller horror or supernatural horror? Izuku asked for clarification. He inched his body to gouge out how he was feeling. His left hip was still in a relative amount of pain from being slammed, and his arm could barely lift. You kidding me? Supernatural horror. Katsuki answered with no hesitation. That shit's the stuff. Izuku shook his head. I love it, but I can't handle it very well. Just admit that you're weak and go. Katsuki made fun of him, and Izuku stuck out his tongue. He liked this, Izuku thought to himself. He liked this conversation, and he liked talking to Katsuki like this, when they were only arguing and picking fights playfully rather than bantering in a hostile manner. When Izuku was allowed to ramble about something, and Katsuki would actually have a response other than shut up. When, for a split second or two, Izuku gets to see the Katsuki chuckle at something he says. This was nice. Izuku was quiet for a moment, and Katsuki stood up off the side, leaning against the washer. After another couple seconds, the greenette looks over to the athlete and says, Kachan, I know where I want to go. Pick me up tomorrow night after practice, Izuku requested, hands on his lap. So you're making demands now, huh? Katsuki leaned his head up against the wall. Izuku blushed. I mean, you don't have to. Where is it? Katsuki crossed his arms. Izuku shrugged. Pick me up and see. You're taking me to a movie theater or something? Katsuki took a guess. No. Izuku shook his head. I've never actually been here before, but I do want to go. Katsuki pushed himself off the wall and placed his hands in his pocket. Did this not count for our hour? He waved his hands over their situation. Izuku laughed. No, Kachan, this is a party. It doesn't count. And you just beat me up, which makes it count even less. Needy, Katsuki accused him. Just as Izuku was about to retort, the same girl from before who was hanging onto Katsuki's arm, with long black hair and pretty eyes, poked in her head, and upon seeing Katsuki, her face lit up. Bakugo! I've been looking for you, she said sweetly. Sara, I was taking care of something. At this, the girl Sara turns towards Izuku with a wide smile. Oh, right, are you okay? Izuku nodded and gave her a smile in return. I'm okay, thanks for asking. She was actually really nice, but Izuku truly was having fun with his and Katsuki's conversation, which he knew was over by now because of her entrance. Although he felt only a tad bit disappointed, it was fine, he thought. He had more of Katsuki's time recently than he could ever actually fathom, and he should probably take a pause now before the problems would start up again. And, as he's thought before, it wasn't his business what or who Katsuki did. Even if he was hot, personality aside, even if everyone at their school had fantasized about him at one point or another, including Izuku, because at the end of the day, they were just partners in a project. Still, as Izuku sees Sara, now with her hands up against the athlete's chest and another on his waistband, he knows what she wants. It was obvious what she wanted. But Izuku wonders if she's gonna get it. And when Katsuki places his nice athletic hands around her waist, Izuku knew his answer. Turning to Izuku for a second, Katsuki asked the brunette, "Oi, how well can you move?" Izuku dangled his leg off the washer before using most of his right side to hoist himself off the ground. He was sore, had flashes of pain here and there, but other than that, he was going to be fine if he didn't wave his arms around too much. For the next hour or so, Izuku hung out with his friends or people he didn't usually talk to at school, and overall had a great time. He came out into the kickoff a legend for being able to do so well against Katsuki, and he had to tell people to refrain from giving him a pat on the back. He still felt the pain from Katsuki's roundhouse kick. The fights were still going on, but Izuku decided to instead spend that time socializing. Shoto had been picked up on one of his dad's employees moments earlier because of some family business that just appeared, and Ochako, after chilling with him for a little bit, was now talking to that long jumper that she had been eyeing earlier. Katsuki was once again standing with that girl and a couple of his pole vaulter friends. One particular vaulter, with brown hair, light gray eyes, and looked about to be 6 feet tall, threw a glance in Izuku's direction once in a while, but Izuku tried to play it no mind. Izuku had seen him jump when he goes to watch Katsuki's practices, and although the person was good, he was nowhere near Katsuki's level. That aside, this left Izuku talking with a group of people near the pool, with a watered-down drink in hand. Although his body was in agony, the vibes were nice tonight. The sun had been down for a while now, and they could barely see the ocean in the distance, only the white foam from the crashing waves. The house was nicely lit up, and the pool had beautiful lights embedded in it. He's been talking to some of his friends, Jiro, who was in the sprint team, Hakagure, Shinzo, who always seemed to take a bit of liking to him, and Momo. It was nice to be with people outside for once, and Izuku was having a great time. That was until someone who was clearly cross-baited came up to the group. More specifically, he came up to Izuku. The person seemed to be conscious enough to know what he was doing, but it was also obvious that he had had a little bit of substance in his system. His words hadn't slurred yet, but the boy was feeling the effects of alcohol that makes you feel more confident and bold. "Midoriya!" he shouted, and placed both his arms on Izuku's shoulders. Slightly surprised, Izuku set his drink on the table off to the side and chuckled lightly. "Have we met before?" Izuku asked with a smile. "No, but your fight was very—" He gave a weird thumbs up as if his coordination was slightly off. "Nice! I'm Yosetsu." Izuku nodded with a cheeky smile. "It's nice to meet you, Yosetsu. You're wobbling a bit. Do you want to sit down?" Izuku offered. Yosetsu shook his head no and giggled. Izuku looked over to his friends, who were pursing their lips trying not to laugh. "No, I want to swim with you," Yosetsu insisted. "Do you want to?" He pointed a finger and wagged it around. "Swim?" Izuku scratched the back of his head with his right arm. "Oh, sorry, I can't really swim right now. The left side of my body can barely function. Hey, are you sure you don't want to go sit down?" At this, Yosetsu's brows furrowed, but then he grinned with a full set of teeth. "I don't want to sit down. I said I wanted to swim." And then the boy pulled his arms back and around him. Izuku's friend's eyes widened and made a move towards the delusional boy. At the same time, Izuku opens his mouth to scream stop, but it had been a tad too late, because in less than 3 seconds, he felt 2 arms push his chest backwards, and he fell into a deep end of the pool with a splash. Was that just his fate these days, Izuku thought as the water submerged his body, to get pushed into bodies of water? At least with Katsuki, that was when he was in tip-top shape. This was just plain cruel, and Izuku wanted to get mad, but he knew Yosetsu was under the influence. That didn't mean that this wasn't a little bit of a problem. From the shock, water rushed into his mouth and up his nose. His eyes were open, so he could see the faint shape of his friends above him yelling and preparing to go in. He made his left arm move, and underwater cried out in pain, which only sent bubbles to the surface. He knew that once he rose to the surface again, it would be impossible to wade out with one arm, so he's hoping someone drags him out quick before he looks stupid flailing. Izuku probably fell in the pool for less than 10 seconds before, to his right, he saw a boy dive in head first. He obviously couldn't see well underwater, but he knew the shape of that body even by its outline. He wanted to internally sigh. Why did it feel sometimes as if his life was a movie? Who else could it be but Katsuki? Izuku rose to the surface and gasped for breath, struggling to be stable with one arm, and then he felt a slight strong hold around his waist, and he was pulled closer to a large, firm body. "You clumsy shit," Katsuki growled, as he swims over towards the edge with a firm grip on Izuku's waist. Izuku coughed up some water and head-butted Katsuki lightly. "It wasn't my fault." Without saying anything, Katsuki got a hold of the edge and used his upper body strength to hoist himself up on dry land first, before pulling Izuku out of the water and onto the edge of the pool. It was now very cold, as his clothes were exposed to the air, and teeth chattered a bit. He clutched his left arm, which was not having fun right now, as he watched Katsuki, also soaking wet, get up on his feet and begin moving. Momo had gone to grab a towel off the nearby chair and wrapped it around Izuku's shoulders, while Katsuki made his way across the pool, and within seconds, the blonde roughly shoved Yosetsu's chest, and the boy stumbled backwards. "You fucking idiot!" Katsuki scowled at the other. "Put down the damn drink, or I'll fucking kill you." Izuku's eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to speak, but the others were already at it. Kirishima and some of the others made their way towards the forming crowd, already trying to calm the blonde down. There was a mixture of feelings in the atmosphere from everyone. Anger at how reckless Yosetsu was, surprise that Bakudeku Katsuki was angry on Midoriya Izuku's behalf, nervousness at the energy radiating from the athlete. "But Bakugo!" Tenki called out nervously. "Just leave it. We'll deal with him." But Katsuki pulled Yosetsu up by the shirt and pointed a finger back at Izuku. "The shitty nerd can barely use the left side of his fucking body, and you want to push him into a damn pool. Are you fucking dumb? Do you want to find out what it feels like?" Katsuki threatened, and dragged Yosetsu until he was dangling and leaned over the pool, with only his feet on the sides. "Should I break your arms and throw you in?" Izuku called out. "Kachan, it's okay. He was drunk." He got up on his knees. Katsuki looked over to Izuku with his typical evil grin. "I can get drunk too," and looked back at Yosetsu. "Would that make it better, bastard? More accurate?" Yosetsu panicked and shook his head no, before stammering. Midoriya said it's okay, so just leave me alone. It was a mistake." Katsuki shoved him to the ground and stepped away. "You don't sound so drunk now, huh? And that's because the nerd doesn't have enough self-respect to get angry." Izuku's eyes widened at the odd statement. Katsuki seemed to be very sure of what he meant by that, but Izuku, on the other hand, didn't understand that statement at all. Self-respect? To be angry? But before he could ponder it any longer, the tenacious blonde spoke again, angrily. "Let me ask you again." Katsuki took a menacing step towards Yosetsu. "Should I show you what it feels like, or have you learned your fucking lesson?" A group of vaulters nervously crowded around Katsuki in case the blonde went forward, but after a moment Yosetsu stammered out, "I've learned," and Katsuki rolled his eyes before stepping back. It was quiet for a moment, everyone taking in the tense situation, when Sara piped in, walking towards Katsuki. "Bakugo," she laughed nervously. "Since when did you care so much about Midoriya?" The crowd formed, looked at the girl, with judging and weird expressions for that. Could she not read the room? It didn't matter if he was Izuku who fell in the pool, or Mina Ashido, or a complete stranger. In the state Izuku was in, for him to be pushed in like that was enough to get anyone angry. Katsuki, despite his reputation for his relationship with Izuku, only went so far, and it was only basic human decency to help Izuku when the greenette could be, dying. Izuku knew this. Katsuki, no matter what he felt for Izuku, wouldn't just let him drown. It did not mean that he cared more than the average person would about a human life. Still, seeing Katsuki angry on his behalf when he refused to get angry was a new situation, one that neither Izuku nor the rest of the people here expected to ever see. Katsuki gave her a glare, and she shut her mouth quickly before growling. I don't have to fucking care about the nerd to not let him die, you dimwit. She turned red in embarrassment. You do have to care about someone to some extent, however, to get angry about it afterwards, though, Izuku thought to himself, but he wasn't going to humor that thought. Looking back at Yosetsu, Katsuki spat out. If you can't trust yourself around a damn drink, don't fucking pick one up. Staring down at the ground in shame, now completely sober, Yosetsu nodded. Fucking hell. Katsuki made his way towards Izuku, eyes shone with residual anger, and he told the crowd to go fuck off before crouching down to help Izuku once more, letting himself be used as a crutch. Come on, we're gonna dry your dumbass off. Izuku leaned on the athlete and walked alongside him back into the house. Although everyone was going back to whatever they were doing, Izuku knew that there were curious eyes here and there. There was no reason as to why Midoriya Izuku's actual friends, rather than his adversary, couldn't help dry him off, but there was Bakugo Katsuki himself helping the boy into the house. Kachan, Izuku said in a soft tone. Thank you. Shut up, Katsuki dismissed. I'm only helping you because I needed to dry off too. Izuku laughed lightly. Not just that, for getting me out of the water, and warning Yosetsu. Izuku thought back to Katsuki's word. Doesn't have enough self-respect to get angry. What does that even mean? What does self-respect have to do with anger? It's whatever, the blonde said. This is the second time you've been pushed into a body of water in the past 7 days, nerd. Izuku managed to get a laugh out at that. And you were to blame for the first one, Kachan. The difference is that you could swim fine then. Katsuki rolled his eyes, as they slowly ascended the stairs onto the second floor where the bedrooms were. That's true, Izuku nodded as he walked along. The other difference was that I actually liked it. He airily laughed to himself. Katsuki made a quick glance in his direction at the comment, but other than that, made no reply. Finally, Katsuki opened a random room and set Izuku on the edge of the bed before locking the door. Quickly, Katsuki threw off his shirt and unbuttoned his jeans, climbing out of his wet clothes. Izuku found himself looking, even though he was sure he's supposed to turn away. But Christ, this view was unfair. And then the blonde interrupted his thoughts. You gonna keep looking, or you gonna stop being a creep and turn away? Izuku squeaked out an apology before closing his eyes. He heard another article of clothing drop, and then Katsuki's footsteps towards the connected bathroom, where he rummaged for a towel. After a few minutes, Izuku heard the footsteps come back out and over to the other side of the room, where he then heard the sound of the closet opening. Kachan, we can't just take their stuff, Izuku voiced. We don't even know whose room this is. It's Tetsu's, Katsuki confirmed. And he'll be fine. Have you seen the kid's house? He won't notice if some of his shit goes missing for a few days. Calm down. A moment later, Katsuki stood in front of him, and Izuku opened his eyes. The blonde was now dressed in a tight-fitted t-shirt and a pair of sweats. He threw a large t-shirt and a pair of boxers at Izuku. Without making Izuku lift up his arms, Katsuki reached down to the back of the greenette sweater and pulled upward from behind so it goes through his head first. And then all he needed to do was slide his sleeves down his arms without making Izuku lift them. His face was slightly red, but he was grateful. Izuku worked on his physique so that it looked nice, but still, being like this in front of this purebred athlete felt intimidating. Careful not to rub too harshly on the bruises, Izuku tried off his torso with a towel, grumbling to himself the entire time. And then suddenly, Katsuki's hands were on the waistband of Izuku's leggings, about to take them off, before Izuku, in a state of panic, grabbed onto the blonde's larger hands to prevent him from going any further. Wait, Izuku asked, hands holding Katsuki's larger ones back. The fuck? Katsuki gave him a look. Listen, nerd, I'm not wearing anything underneath, Izuku spluttered out, cheeks red, as his grip on Katsuki's hands got tighter. Katsuki's eyes widened for a split second, before his hands flicked to the wet spandex of Izuku's waistband. You wanna try then? Do you know how fucking tight these are? And now it's wet too? If you want to attempt that with one good arm, go for it. Izuku pursed his lips. Getting off normal wet clothes was frustrating because of how sticky and matted it gets, but getting skin-tight leggings off that were also wet off his body was going to take some strength that he didn't have on his left side. Katsuki turned around, and Izuku attempted to shimmy his way out of the too small pair of leggings, only using his right hand to pull down the left side. It was as hard as trying to peel off something super glued to his skin. He could probably do it if he had another 15 minutes, but giving up, Izuku looked nervously to the athlete standing facing away from him. Can you do it? Izuku asked. It's taking too long, but you can't look. Katsuki rolled his eyes as he turned around. Why the fuck would I want to? And then he got really close. Too close. It didn't seem to bother Katsuki one bit, as his face was past Izuku's shoulders, lips parallel to his ear. But at least, Katsuki wouldn't be able to see him from that position. The athlete's arms were able to fit around Izuku's waist, and his hands were once again on the waistbands of his leggings. Katsuki started to pull out the wet spandex. Rather than shutting the fuck up, Katsuki growled in his ear. You're a dirty fucking slut, aren't you, Deku? Walking around with no underwear? He said as he tugged. Izuku's well-shaped and plush ass rubbed against Katsuki's knuckles as he pulled them off. It was clear just how thick Izuku's bottom was by how his ass spilled out of the spandex leggings as they were being tugged off. That's not it. Izuku bit his lip, trying not to focus on the way Katsuki talked to him just now. Stop it, Izuku. Stop it. You're not even friends. Stop it. Wearing underneath with the leggings makes it, get stuck, so it's just more comfortable without it. Plus, I was wearing a sweater on top that covered. I was messing with you. Calm down. Katsuki groaned and rolled his eyes, then continued. Lift your ass for me. Izuku wanted to scream. He knew that this was just how Katsuki talked, and the blonde didn't think anything of it. But why did he have to say, for me? Katsuki could have easily just said, lift your ass, and be done with it. But the extra 2 words made Izuku's brain rattle. Izuku used his hand to hook around Katsuki's shoulder and pulled himself to lift his body, just enough that Katsuki could pull it through before sitting back down and mumbling, Why do you talk like that? Katsuki still didn't look as he tugged the spandex all the way down Izuku's thighs and legs. Talk like what? So Katsuki really didn't understand the power of his rhetoric, Izuku thought, and frowned before dismissing. Never mind. Once the leggings were off, Katsuki threw them off to the side and turned around. You can put on your own boxers. I'll help you with your shirt. Izuku nodded and quickly grabbed the boxers. Thank you, he said hurriedly before stressing to put them on. He really hated feeling useless, but he could only do so much in this state. After some painkillers and a good night's sleep, he'll probably feel better in the morning. With a bit of struggle, Katsuki helped him put on the shirt, somehow, without making him lift his arms much. It required a lot of stretching the neckline, but it was eventually doable. Izuku found himself laughing a lot at how Katsuki was getting frustrated with the t-shirt. It probably would have been easier to go with a button-up. Right there. No, put that arm in first. Izuku tried to direct the other. Katsuki barked. Deku, I'm going to leave you to do this yourself if you keep bossing me around. I'm telling you, Izuku ignored him. Just get a button-up. Then we'll only need to slide my arms in. No, Katsuki insisted, intent on doing this. I've already put way too much damn energy into this thing. It is going to go on. Then put it on my left arm first, Izuku ordered. Shut up, Katsuki told him. No, you shut up, Izuku bit back, and they go back and forth like this before finally, after actually listening to Izuku's advice, they were able to get it on. It shouldn't have been as hard as it was. They came downstairs, and not too long afterwards, clutching the wet clothes in the plastic bag they found in the bathroom, there were a couple of curious eyes pointed towards the 2 people who usually couldn't stand to be within meters of each other, and now just came down the stairs together. Of course, the reasoning was obvious, but that didn't make the sight any less unusual. Where's your ride? Katsuki looked around as they reached the level floor. Izuku craned his neck to search the area before spotting Ochako on the leather couch making out with the same guy she's been eyeing all night. He would usually cheer for her to get it, but he really needed to head back right now. Izuku groaned. Probably going home with someone else tonight. Where's your other friend? The half-and-half bastard? Katsuki asked. He went home a while ago, Izuku frowned. Katsuki then ran a hand down his face, and after a moment gestured over to the door. Come on. Izuku asked, following behind. I'm heading home, Katsuki responded. I'll drop you off, but you fucking owe me gas money. Izuku spoke up in protest. But it's only 10. I don't want to make you leave early and take me home. Katsuki stopped and turned around, looking down at the greenette. You're not making me do anything. I'm going home because I only stay out late on weekends. It's a Thursday. I have class and practice tomorrow. The shit ain't all about you, Deku. Oh, Izuku closed his mouth and then nodded. In that case, thank you, Kachan. He smiled up at the other. You've done a lot for me tonight. It was different. It felt like this past week or two, Izuku was able to experience Katsuki in a new way. One that is still the same gruff, rude Katsuki, but with a little more considerateness. Katsuki rolled his eyes and weaved back through the crowd, standing on the driveway shooting hoops. Don't fucking forget, I beat your ass earlier. Don't be so damn grateful, shitty nerd. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't even need my fucking help. It was consensual, Izuku reminded him as they walked down the road, filled with parked vehicles until they reached Katsuki's ride. Besides, I got in a couple bruises too. Speaking of that, are you okay? I'm fine, Katsuki stated blankly, opening his driver's side to the door and climbing in. Izuku followed suit and, using his right arm, hooked the seatbelt over and settled himself inside. The drive back was tiring. Izuku hadn't known how exhausted he was until he relaxed in the passenger seat and felt the waves of sleepiness kick in. It was earlier than he would normally go to sleep, which was around 12 a.m. or so, but because he had been so physically active and pain, the energy was slowly dissipating from him. He was conscious enough to make out small comments here and there and listen to the lyrics of Elton John's Your Song on the speakers. Izuku noticed by now that Katsuki liked a lot of 80s music, especially the ones with crazy and loud beats, that or nostalgic synthwave ones in a while, and occasionally a modern rap or pop song. This particular song was more mellow though. Izuku liked it too. When they pulled up to his house, the lights were off, thank God. That meant his mother had gone to sleep instead of waiting up to make sure he's home on time. He was only late by about 30 minutes, but it probably would have been a big deal if she was awake. Besides, now he doesn't have to explain to her why he's holding his left arm like this, and why the pain in his hip was making him walk a little funny. If Izuku forces it, he can straighten out his walk, but he was sure it would go away by tomorrow. The left arm, probably 3 to 4 days, but that was easily hideable for the most part, and the cut was hidden by his hair. As Izuku opened the door, there was obvious exhaustion in his droopy eyes, but he had just enough energy to turn around and ask Katsuki. Kachan? Izuku asked, followed by a yawn. The blonde looked up from the console. What is it? Are we on for tomorrow night? Izuku reminded before looking down at the ground. He never actually answered. They had to do something tomorrow either way, since it was the last day for the project, unless they wanted to count the evening at the playground doing physics homework as their 1 hour, but Izuku didn't grab a picture for that, and there was something Izuku really wanted to do. Katsuki thought about it before skeptically asking, Auntie's gonna let you go out with last-minute permission? Izuku blinked. He was so caught up in his desire to go that he didn't even consider that. However, his answer wouldn't have changed even if he had thought about it beforehand. He needed a change in his life, and he couldn't believe it took a little freedom brought on by the town rascal and a super athlete snaking him out to a lake and giving him a taste of what it means to feel alive to get him to act. Looking determined, Izuku told the blonde, she's going to. Katsuki took a second to respond, but ultimately shrugged. Be ready by 6.